Morning, all. All right, so yesterday I talked about Buffalo and I saw comments. Well, Detroit. We was going to talk about Detroit, and there was one that apparently I'm miserable when I talk about Detroit. Who knew? All right, so let's talk about Detroit. The Detroit Red Wings are looking to make the playoffs for the first time since 2016. The 2015-16 season, they finished 41-30-11, 93 points that year. They lost in the first round in 5 games. And I remember there being a lot of calls from Red Wing fans at that point that, okay, we've been nursing ourselves into the playoffs for the last few years. It is overdue. It is time for a rebuild. And the team was kind of dragged into a rebuild by the 2016-17 season where they go 33, 36, and 13. 30, 19, or 30, 39, and 13 the year after. 2018, 2019, they're then 32, 40, and 10. And it felt like maybe this wasn't going to go on that much longer, but it does. 2019, 2020, it gets much worse. 17, 49, and 5. The following season, just the divisional games, shortened season and all that, they go 19, 27, and 10. 2021, 2022, they're back to 32, 40, and 10. And the season that we just finished a few months back, they finished 35, 37, and 10. So they've not been above NHL 500 since they made the playoffs. And this should be the year they get to above NHL 500. They still have cap space to add if they want to, with everybody signed $5,156,527. So the Red Wings could bring on another contract. The Red Wings could be a broker as a third party for certain trades to go down in the NHL, which would likely net them extra draft picks and or prospects. So they're a team to keep an eye on from that perspective. And of course, then the question becomes, so are they going to be in contention? Well, they do have some upcoming restricted free agents, Berggren, Raymond, and Sider. Now, Raymond and Sider are both coming off of years that were down from where they were their first year. Sider had a much better second half than he had first half, and if he plays as well throughout the season as he did the second half of the year, they're in good shape, and he's going to get a huge raise. Raymond, on the other hand, had some downbeats last year, but overall, I still think he played well. Berggren has a ton of potential. Could actually end up in this top six before the season's done. Could push his way to third line at the minimum, I would think. And their unrestricted free agents, notables here, Perron, Gostisbehere, and Reimer. Perron, of course, getting older. You have to wonder how much longer his production is going to be really strong in the National Hockey League, but he should be good for another year. And it's interesting, too, because they bring in Ghost for a year. Hall has been brought in. A lot of discussion about Hall's contract and how pricey it is. But the reality is, he may very well not end up being in their top four this year. Oli Mata's making $3 million, probably ends up being the number 7 defenseman. So they have a defense that it will be interesting to see who ends up playing with whom. So they only had 3 goal scorers last year, Larkin, Perron, and Kubalik. And of course, Kubalik was traded in the deal that brought back DeBrincat. A lot of this with the attack is going to rely on DeBrincat not only bringing his own numbers, but bringing other players' numbers up, right? So their top 6 likely will include DeBrincat, Larkin, Perron. You got to think that those 3 probably form the top line, although Raymond may very well push Perron down. Fabry, Comfer, Raymond may very well be the rest of that top 6, but as I said, Berggren might be pushing his way up. There's other good young players on this team who could push their way up into top 6 positioning. And then the top 4 on the blue line, Sider, as previously mentioned. He had a good chemistry with Wallman. Wallman was rewarded with an extension. He's well paid. Sherratt and Petrie may very well be that second pairing, but as I said, you've got Hall, you've got Gostisbehere. At the very least, you've got a solid top 6. Not the best top 6 in the NHL, but a solid top 6 in its own right. The goaltending is where the question mark is going to be. So you have Husso, you have Reimer. Which one of those 2 ends up being the goalie to take him to the playoffs? Now, yes, Lyon is there, but Lyon very likely ends up in Grand Rapids. I don't see him pushing either Reimer or Husso out of a spot, and I don't see Detroit carrying 3 goaltenders. So we'll see if Lyon ends up in Grand Rapids. If they're going to get him to Grand Rapids, they should waive him very early in training camp. It's much easier to get a guy through waivers very early in training camp than it is very late in training camp. And so if they do that early, it probably won't be a big deal. And then they have 3 solid goaltenders in their system. Now, one thing to keep in mind with Detroit is this is going to be a young squad, and you're going to get some mistakes with young players. It's just the reality of it. Raymond, Valeno, Sider, Berggren, Soderblom's going to be one to watch as well. We'll see whether or not he breaks into the roster, breaks onto the team, and with his size, you have to think they're going to at least give him a shot at fourth line, maybe third line minutes in the preseason, see what he does. Edvinsson might be a severe wild card in all this because I didn't mention him in the top six. Probably doesn't start the year with the Detroit Red Wings. He does not need waivers to get sent down to Grand Rapids. And maybe you're better off having Edvinsson playing top minutes in the AHL. And then if you need to call him up because of an injury in your top four, he's already playing top minutes. And he's not sitting in the press box watching, right? Marco Kasper is going to try for a shot on this roster. Already quoted this summer that he's gunning for the second line center spot. So while JT Compher's been brought in, I think Kasper will be given the chance at that second line center spot. Again, it could be very interesting to watch the Red Wings during the preseason. Danielson, of course, drafted this past June. Very unlikely he ends up being on the team right away, but he's signed a contract. Mazur, a lot of discussion about Carter Mazur and what he might be able to do. Wallinder, of course, on the blue line, and Casa is the future in net. So if he ends up being, in a tandem with Lyon, for instance, that could be a really solid one at the AHL level. This is a team that wasn't as physical as a lot of other teams this past season. They were 19th in hits per 60 minutes, but they were 11th in blocked shots per 60 minutes. So they weren't shy about blocking shots. I would expect that under Coach Lalonde that will continue. I think the hits will probably come up at least a little bit. They were 30th in takeaways. So in terms of taking away the puck, they need to get a little more aggressive. But I will say in their defense, they were 25th in giveaways, meaning they did not give away the puck nearly as much as other teams. So they do need to be a little more aggressive and while still protecting the puck well themselves. But this means that they're probably playing a little bit of a different style than other teams. So if we see the takeaways number get better, the giveaways will probably go up a little bit too. Husso, as I mentioned before, the goaltending could be one of those question marks. Husso, in terms of quality starts this past season, so these are starts where you record a better than 900 save percentage, 46.4% of his starts, which is low. You want that to be above 50%. Ideally, 60% or higher. Hellberg and Nedeljkovic both had a 38.5% rate of quality starts, and both of them, of course, are out in Detroit going into this season. So now it's up to Reimer to get those numbers up. And Reimer, I thought, was better for San Jose than what I thought Detroit got from Hellberg and Nedeljkovic. Although Hellberg was good, I do think Reimer is an upgrade from Hellberg. I do hope Hellberg gets into some games this year because I think that was kind of a feel-good story last season where he bounced around the league a bit, but at least he got some games in. That had been a long time coming. So one thing they have to avoid this coming season is the losing streaks. I talked about this with the Buffalo video yesterday. Detroit has this problem as well. They had 3 losing streaks of 5 or more games. One of them was 5, 2 of them were 6. And the final 5 games of the year was one of those losing streaks. So for the Detroit Red Wings, avoiding those losing streaks is important. And that last losing streak at the end of the year keeps them below NHL 500, right? So they were 28, 21, and 8. So pretty solid record on February 23rd. And then they went 0-5 and 1 over their next 6 games. But prior to that, they had won 7 of 8. So what's interesting with Detroit over the last few years is if you were of the mind that Detroit's getting better and that they're on the verge of making the playoffs, you get enough win streaks, you get enough good moments here that it feels like, hey, this if they can have those streaks last a little bit longer, it's sustainable. But if you're on the other side of it and you're saying, I don't think this team's much better at all, you do get the losing streaks in there that can have you pointing and saying, see, I really don't think they're better. So really, it's glass half full, glass half empty. Are you an optimistic fan, pessimistic fan? You can find plenty with Detroit's track record over the last couple of years to prove whichever view you see as in terms of where this team is standing right now. So scoring by each period, and this is an example of something they need to turn around. So then a negative 12 in the first period, allowed 82 goals, scored 70, which is not great. But the second period was a disaster. They allow 102 and they score 77. So they were a negative 25 in the second period. You can't win that way. And they're not the only team that struggled in second periods. It's interesting. We'll see if that changes this year. In terms of third periods, they were good. Scored 86. They allowed 85. But since you have a negative 37 in your first and second period, that +1 really doesn't help a whole lot. In the overtime, they were 4-6. So 4 goals scored, 6 goals allowed for a -2, which again, you're getting points in all those games. But it just shows that the second period really was their Achilles heel this past season. When they scored first, they were 23-12-7, which is good, and it definitely shows how much that first goal helped them, because when they were trailing first, they were 12-25-3. So again, scoring first is key. Getting the first goal more often for an extra, say, let's say instead of scoring the first goal in 42 games, they score the first goal in 50 games. Suddenly you've probably got a team that's above the playoff line for a little bit longer than they have been the last couple of years. And in 1-goal games, they had their struggles. They were 12-8-10. So 12 wins, 8 regulation losses, and 10 overtime or shootout losses. So they need to improve that record. And we'll see if they're able to get there. And that's really the question mark. Both the Hockey News and the channel voting predicted 7th place in the Atlantic for Detroit, which would be a non-playoff appearance. But at the same time, I don't think that the difference between them and 7th place and where 4th place is going to be, I don't think that separation in the Atlantic is quite what it is, say, in the Pacific or in the Central, where those 7th place teams probably going to be well out of a playoff picture. Detroit should not be well outside of a playoff picture with a few weeks to go in the season. So one thing to keep an eye on, and this is really, in all honesty, when you're building a contender, your strength down the middle is really important. So looking at face-off percentages and just strength down the middle, you've got Larkin, 54.4% in the face-off circle. Very good, right? Compher, this past year in Colorado, 48.8%. Kopp, 49.8% when he played in the middle. Veleno, 42.6%. Rasmussen, when he took face-offs, 51% for him. So those are your 5 most likely to end up playing down the middle who are not named Casper. If Casper gets into the lineup, does he play down the middle? Does he play on the wing? These are lineup decisions Derek Lalonde's going to have to make. But I do still like what Yzerman has going here. I think this is a team that could surprise people. And yeah, we'll see where they're at this year. Their strength down the middle, that to me is a bit of a question mark, because when you look at the center depth of teams like Toronto, of Tampa Bay, Florida. Now, Boston's has definitely taken a hit this past season, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're looking at a lot of predictions that Boston's going to fall down the standings, right? But then you look at Ottawa, you look at Buffalo as well. There's some really good strength down the middle in this division, and so does that end up hurting Detroit? We'll see. And again, for Husso, I think he needs to be more consistently good. He had some very good starts, but again, that 46.4% quality start, I think they're going to want it about 56%. And then you might be talking about playoffs. It can go that way. They can make the playoffs. So do they. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and I promise I'm not miserable when I talk about the Detroit Red Wings. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.